says, come on up on the third. Put your chickens. And I said, well, I told the guy I was gonna take them up to find some government chickens. They're little tiny eggs like they lay those. Yes, yep. So that's a small omelet. Yes, yeah. Yeah, you need about what, 4 to make 1 egg? Yeah. Oh, I made the mistake of going home and closing my eyes. Yeah. We're going to have to issue hand trucks. Yeah. Carry everything. Wheelbarrows and stuff like that.
Hey, it's good seeing you.
You too, Dave. How you doing?
I've been thinking about you.
Go ahead.
Where have you been? We need you.
Well, I've been sitting up there. Except for last week, I was down in Oregon.
Well, I didn't see you on Thursday and Friday up there.
Thursday and Friday. Well, I was in Olympia on Thursday, actually.
Oh, so you needed the map?
Yes, I can't. Well, wait.
No worries. So I put it on your,
Right here?
in your spot, but I'll go get you. I didn't get the map.
Okay.
Yeah, what I did, George, when I went through these, is I did a quick outline of the main concern that they had.
Yeah.
Sure.
I did too.
And actually, 61 responded to having.
We as a group voted for too.
Yes,
And I think
right,
we
I made a motion on that,
Yeah.
yeah, send in a comment, and the wife would send in a comment, and they were just like, oh, it's fine, you know, that's great, though. But it is, and I thought, boy, this fits a couple paragraphs.
I'll send it to
Yeah.
The thing is, we've always done.
You look serious.
What's that? Oh, okay.
I do my best.
So I'll get them to you by the end of this evening, is that okay?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
So that's kind of my plan.
That's what I hear.
This is your seat
You're
here.
working that confined spot tonight?
Here, I'll scoot over.
No. Look what I've done over here already.
So you're just gonna stay down there, that's great.
I will probably end up down there.
We can rock that, come up here, just
Yeah.
as we can over here.
That's
Well,
okay.
see, I
I
can
will have
find
to
my
be pretty good
comments.
at sitting in between these two.
I can find all of my
Sign the
comments
paper and I'll take it for you.
right
Okay. So that you don't want to sit by us, that's okay. Made up. So.
What's today, 22? 23?
I thought September was close
Fourteenth.
enough. 23rd.
There's theirs. Is it supposed to be on the?
Okay, well, now we'll find out.
Yes, you got this,
I'll be up there for you.
Oh, okay. You're here, I'll move my
I'll be,
files
I'll
over.
be sociable.
if you do it on Mondays.
And you did a good job, Tuesday, or whatever day it was we were there.
The 14th
Pardon me?
is open
You
weekend.
did a good job down there.
Oh, thank you.
There's some other
That's a
things.
compliment.
Well, I mean, 12th, 13th, and 14th, and that's a day
Cut
off.
in,
And then you chase the cows all.
did the fine work, explain it, I appreciate
Like
that.
when you're hunting.
Well, you've got all their Irish. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean,
I think I got the biggest problem.
So you weren't the personal eyewitness when the federal government came down and said, I did.
no, I've had more fun with that. The state, they don't wanna argue with me. Every time I've been elected,
Yeah, ever before the state was, coming to
I
make
gave you
you
just a little bit compared to what you gave me.
Well,
I came from a meeting Tuesday with in the middle,
Oh, okay,
so you can have that.
okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
they didn't care about what.
Yeah. We got budget wrestling to do.
Oh,
Well,
Yeah.
maybe 2017 or 2011.
Every time I come in, it's so tough, yes, but she has to do it. Everybody takes care of it for me.
You want a big club? Or you can meet it tonight?
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, we'll call to order the meeting of the Planning Commission for Monday, September 23rd, 2019. First up is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
Do we need to add Chris Branch to the agenda so we can hear from him what he would like us to do?
I'll add it.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda with that addition.
Next up is approval of state 19. Remove. Any other comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Next up, new business, public hearing, deliberation on comp plan, DEIS. We'll first, hear from, the director of planning, and then after that, we'll let Chris Branch, commissioner speak.
Did you want to go first?
No, go ahead, take care of your business. Do you have anything for us, Angie?
About
You're not.
3/4 of the way through. And I would like for this meeting to kind of get us organized and maybe when you're talking about the issues that are important to you, maybe we can focus on an issue for the next meeting. And this kind of outlines what I kind of envision in the next few meetings. So from this meeting, I'd like you to just talk about whatever you want to talk about and tell me whatever else you need from me, because I know I sent you a bunch of stuff the last time. I didn't know if you need further information. And then any questions that you might need answers to, which I know there's some from the last time that you'll probably have. this time. And I'd like to get a schedule of maybe some meetings and maybe some extra meetings, some special meetings, if you are willing to hold some additional meetings to get through the bulk of issues that we will have to deal with. So I kind of put it in two compartments. So like there's issues with the draft comprehensive plan, and there's issues that people have been bringing forward with the DEIS. And how are we gonna work on both and still get through this process? So I feel like it'd be best to have focused meetings on one issue each time, one or two, depending on how big the issue is, and then feedback from you as to what you need from me to maybe draft something, a different section, or get you additional information, and then bring that back and go over that. And then, once we kind of get some of that nailed down, I'm imagining that there'll be a supplemental EIS, depending on how many changes are made to the draft, and how much information you feel there might be data gaps or things that need to be addressed in the DEIS. And then, with that, there'll be changes to the comp plan. And so I envision that going out for comment again once those changes have been made to get public input on the revised draft. And then a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So,
You want to have that done by 1st November?
sure, if you want to meet every day.
We're meeting every day then.
Can I ask a question?
I'd like to comment before Chris, because I had some questions. How are we going to approach the days ahead? Because we could meet every other week, and it's gonna be very difficult to even have some type of a time frame. So I really struggled. Gina and I was in Medhow the other day, whatever day it was.
Last Tuesday, almost a week ago.
Yeah. And the concern I had in listening to the people, and I cannot stress the importance of the comments that we have received in the last 2 or 3 weeks. They are good. These people done a lot of homework, and it's not good. So I come up with 4 different alternatives before Mr. Branch, because he'll tell us, well, that's good.
I don't have another one, it's okay.
But we could take the 2009-2014 comp plan and take the 3 different lawsuits that we have, and the water quality, quantity, density, all that stuff, and go, use that as a format.
That's precisely my point. That's what I mean by focusing on an issue each
okay.
time.
I mean, but the problem we have is there's a lot of ordinances and resolutions, and if it wasn't for you giving all that stuff to me, I didn't know what the commissioners were doing, and I don't think they know what we're all doing, okay? Fortunately, Cliff has got we've been through a lot in planning, which is great. The second approach would be to take the new revised comp plan and go page by page, take the public testimony, which I laid out some there, and I'm trying to put it in categories, because in some of them there's 7 or 8 different comments on that same subject, and blend them with what we have, addressing the concerns, coming up with our own alternatives between, this is my opinion, between 3 and 4, or whatever you want, some of our own alternative here. There are many subjects that were not updated, and I've asked again and again. I remember that where we put them downstairs, like the critical wildlife areas out there as well. That was the second one. The third one was address the concerns of the lawsuits, moving on with the zoning, the comp plan. Plan was supposed to be done first of the year, first day, or actually it last of December, okay? That's 9, 10 months ago. The fourth alternative was, to get Alex Mackey in here, he's the county attorney, and ask the commissioners if he could give us an agenda and procedure to get us out of this jam. Because if you look at the lawsuits, we need to address those lawsuits, otherwise there's gonna be more lawsuits, in my opinion. And find out if the commissioners could, he could come to one meeting here and we would be well organized and see what direction is he gonna start us off on, so we know what we're doing. I mean, we know what we're doing because we're experienced, and so is Mr. Mackey. But if we get a new planning director in here, he's gonna be the lowest one on the totem pole and not knowing anything. You see what I'm concerned, and the ball, we're gonna have to take the ball and run with it. And some of you may have different, I'm just talking out loud here, and in the conversation.
Okay, Phil, George, Burley.
Okay.
Okay, I was just gonna make a comment on what Angie was saying, and I wanted clarification. You were saying that the environmental impact is driven by what we have in the comp plan, not the other way around, right?
You're talking about the draft EIS
Yes.
is driven, the draft EIS created alternatives based on some of the language in the comp plan
Right, so if we
and
can
population
zero in
projections.
on those, what, the alternatives that we like, and get those, as we adopt those, that will drive how the EIS is finished? Or is the EIS finished now?
Well,
I mean, that's what I'm trying to get
we
clarification.
have a lot of, there's options, right? It doesn't have to be super structured, like, that's why I was talking about the supplemental EIS. If you all find that there's gaps and there's things that need to be addressed in that draft environmental impact statement that weren't addressed, that's what a supplemental EIS would be for, and that could be based on the discussions that you're having, based on the comments that you received.
Okay, so, the way I was looking at it is we've got 4 alternatives on several different options, categories. And if we zero in and decide, okay, we wanna go with the parts 2 and 3 and parts 1 and 2, like on the ag lands of significance, that's gonna be a big stumbler.
So
If we
I
get
think
that-
that there's flexibility, and then that would be what the supplemental EIS would capture, the conversations and the decisions that you're making throughout this process.
But the point I was gonna try and make is we focus on getting the comp plan, the options that we've got in here, and get those taken care of. Then that's gonna decide what happens with the EIS, rather than trying to make the EIS fit what we're trying to do. So I kinda look at, we can somewhat ignore the EIS and get the comp plan where we want it.
Yeah,
And then we don't have to, then the EIS is gonna have to catch up to what we do, rather than us trying to make them both fit.
well, and that's what this kind of says, there's two separate issues in this memo. There's the draft EIS, and then there's the comp plan. Obviously, from the public, there's inefficiencies in both, it's missing things. And so we can address the comp plan, but then as we're doing that, we will also, like, I can also in the background be addressing some of the
Well, that was the point
environmental
I was trying to
impact
make.
statements, yes,
You're the one that has to do the EIS.
yes.
We have to do the comp plan.
Oh no, there he goes.
Actually, it may have been better for me to start, because there's a couple of things about that stuff that I wanted to talk to you about.
I tried to get you to.
Yeah, I know,
No,
it's
I'm just
okay.
kidding.
Actually, it doesn't really matter, because we have the conversation, and I think that's the most important part. I think that one concern I have is that we don't want to be driven by a lawsuit. I think that the conversation that we need to have is with the people, and I'm doing that right now, is having the conversation with the folks that have the lawsuit on the table.
Right.
And that's been the most difficult thing about being in office, is that when I initially came in, it was like, no, you got this lawsuit pending and you can't talk to anybody. And eventually I went, wait a minute here. You know, I've got to talk to my constituents, and my constituents include people that have filed the suit. So talking with side and talk really rationally about just what they're saying. And I think that if we do that, you might find that there's a few things there that you might just plain agree with, because just to start out even, the plan itself, you know, one of the key comments, and there's a lot of common comments there, you know, you got a lot of comments, but they're all saying the same thing. And one of those is that just the organization of the plan is important, and that's one thing that I wanted to talk about right off. And it's something that Dave's right. I mean, the first time I started in this planning field, it was like in 1989, the summer, and Dave was the chair of the Planning Commission in TWISP. And it was, and I had walked into the room and Dave was giving assignments to people, and you know, had to do your homework before you came to the next meeting, et cetera, et cetera. But we got our way through a comp plan, and we had some clients that were adverse to the plan. It's get to half of what at least half of what part of the lawsuit is actually, those folks are represented by Future Wives, who does challenge a lot of plan resource lands. And the resource lands are probably the toughest you're dealing with, especially in the case of how they've been presented so far. And I think the one thing that's really most important is that, and this is the tough part, and I don't know how many of you saw this little writing over here on this whiteboard over the last year or so, maybe more than that.
I saw it.
And I was writing to myself and to someone out there in the world that might listen, but it didn't really matter. I wrote it there because eventually I thought I was going to get to that. And really the simplest parts of this planning effort are those three things, and what we have is it's the inventory. And you know, you're taking your comp plan, whether you're updating it or not, you're looking at what we have today, you're looking at the land uses that exist today, and certainly if you do any kind of zoning at all, which to do zoning, you have to plan under 3670. You want to see what that inventory looks like, because if you're going to be looking at any kinds of lands out there, you're going to try to look and see if you can make the land uses compatible and the zoning code provisions or the zoning districts compatible with what exists today the best you possibly can. And you're never going to get away with not creating non-conforming pre-existing uses because of the way zoning has occurred in Okanogan County over a long period of time. And that's been allowing a lot of different kinds of uses in different places. And it's really hard to plug anything in there that's real compatible. Marijuana farms are a really good example of that. Because we don't have places necessarily that you could say they work real well here, because there's always some residential mixed in, and that's a problem. But what we want is probably the most challenging, I think. And that vision, to me, is what it's the touchstone. Whenever you're doing this comprehensive planning work, you should always be able to go back to that vision and say, are we really working to achieve that vision? And so it is followed by goals, objectives, and then policies. And those policies are the things that tell us as county commissioners how to act. So in the end, you know, I'm looking at a variety of different things, and for you, how to act in the future, because it's a policy. What's the policy of the county? The policy of the county is that if our vision says that we're trying to protect agricultural uses, then that policy should say things like, we're going to support any kind of activity that is an incentive for farmers to stay in business. You know, I'm using examples here. I think I put a couple of them in a document. And really, you know, that vision shouldn't have couched in it a lot of stuff that you're trying to say, but it's really more of a fear, and it's trying to say, look, we don't want to be overregulated. Nobody wants to be overregulated, but certainly it's not in the vision statement. You can put it somewhere and get over that part of it as quickly as you can, because there's a lot of laws that have to do with takings that already exist in the books. Cite that, you know, whatever it means.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
The vision statement is provided to us by the county commissioners, is it not?
There was a vision statement in a conversation that I was having with Commissioner Hubbard, and that's probably the vision statement that you're talking about, is a recently drafted,
Well, yeah, it's in.
or is it the 2014?
It's in the comp plan.
The 2014 comp plan?
Well, it's in this
Could you read it?
2018 plan. It's the one that Andy
Okay, okay, so,
Lines 84 to 88 on
okay,
three.
well,
It's
and that,
word for word.
and that, I remember the conversation well. Let's see, yeah. Vision statement, okay. The conversation was about what vision statements are, and Commissioner Hover and I were challenging each other on what we want. And his question was, what do I want? And I was saying, well, no, what do you want? What do you envision the county to look like in 20 or 30 years? And that's what that's about. And so he came up with this. It's not a locked-in thing. He just came up with it.
That was my question, is that
Yeah,
what we work?
yeah, because I look at it, and since then, right when he came up with it, I said, hooray! You came up with a vision statement about what you see in the future. And I've come up with my own. It's me speaking here, and I don't expect to give anybody a vision statement, because I've tried that before when I was doing planning endeavors in other communities in Okanogan County. And eventually you came to something, but I kept throwing things out there, because what happens most often is when you have a vision statement that you have to do, people are going right to what you need. They're just constantly, it's like, we need more businesses here. We need, this and that. And you're going, no, wait a minute, let's forget all that stuff and think about what about Okanogan County makes you live here. And there's a lot of talk about things like rural lifestyle, and that means some different things to different people. And so somehow or another in that vision statement, if you can capture that, that works. And I'll just read an example of what I think. Because in the one vision statement that Commissioner Hover came up with, he's making a statement about existing conditions, vast land mass, clean air and water, and immense areas of public land, diverse recreational opportunities. They lend themselves to a rural lifestyle. And then my question right away comes to mind, if I have to use that as a touchstone, is what is rural lifestyle? What does it mean? Because it means a lot to different people. So planning efforts should be made to promote this lifestyle, and also to look to the future to create and cultivate new economic opportunities. That leaves the vision statement. It's basically saying, this is what we should do. So when I said what we want, I think the most important thing is that what you see is a vision, but how you get there should be coming a little bit later in the process. And so when I got this pile of stuff that you guys got, which is all good information, on the road, I stopped at one of the stores and got some cheap binders, and I went, this is implementation, and this is a comp plan. And I separated the two immediately. Because honestly, what happened in the past here was that you guys were given the task of doing zoning and comprehensive planning at the same time, and really personally, I say that does not work very well. Because what happens to you is you're constantly switching back and forth from the implementation tool back to the planning tool, and you can get lost in that. I get lost in that, and I've been doing that stuff for 27 years or so. So I really encourage you to do that. Don't get too wrapped around the axle on the lawsuit, because I'm hoping that the lawsuit needs less attorneys and more conversation. Because when you have attorneys involved in it, and you have somebody reviewing your comp plan, okay, you give them some instructions when they do that. But what can happen is that you get wrapped up in legal stuff that doesn't really achieve what you need to achieve in the end. I think a legal review really is more for, have I met the requirements of the act? Am I responding to these comments appropriately? But I look through a lot of the comments and I go, some of these things that are being brought up are really important things. It's just like Dave was saying, I've talked to some people, categories underneath it. And so when I look at 3670, I see that land use element, and there's a listing of things that have to be considered in it. Thank you. She comes prepared. So proposed generation and general location extent of the uses of land for all these things, agriculture, all these things. And so I look out there into the world and I say, what is there where the infrastructure lies. And that's a question that comes up for me, is that we have to make sure we have a connect to the cities and towns. And when I read this comp plan and when I read it in the past, I didn't see a good connection there. Because they do provide, they are Okanogan County. They are us. And some of you might live in the cities and towns. But I've lived both in and out of them, and it doesn't really matter to me as long as these uses and this economy is built around in Okanogan County, and the cities and towns may provide those things. So just a thought there. So all I'm doing is just trying to provide a framework, and I would like to make sure that you're not thinking that you're actually writing an inadequate plan here. It's just, I think, the organization and then addressing some of the issues that have been brought up several times by people, fire planning, various standards. They're in the implementation part of it. But we need to be able to take policies, or goals and policies and say, our goal is to achieve this. That's part of our vision statement. But we need to, let's say we're dealing with fire ingress egress. When we do subdivision reviews, we need those subdivision standards to say something about that. And that's roads and those kind of things. And so that's kind of the arrangement, and it's really not as complicated as it sounds. I think that if we continue to have conversations with folks that are addressing us and making comments and filing a suit against us, I think the suit is more, those lawsuits are more to say, are you listening to what we're saying? And I think we should respond and say, yes, we're listening, and these are the issues, and these are how we're trying to cover them, without going, no, we'll fight you in court, we're not gonna do that. Now, there may be a place there where you decide that may be true, but I think we haven't gone far enough with the issues that have been brought up to get there, to say we'll defend this. I mean, I give an example. Let me read this vision statement. This is me talking, right? I've written a lot of vision statements that have never been adopted, so don't worry about it. And I followed Commissioner Hover's idea, but I just made it more of a vision to me. And so I say, we see a future of economic vitality based upon the utilization and responsible management of the vast natural resources available to us. We see mountains of healthy forests that provide timber grazing, natural forest products, recreation, and unique aesthetic value. We see clean water delivered from the forest to our valleys through rivers and streams that invigorate our rich valley soils for agriculture, to feed abundant fish and wildlife habitat, and provide domestic water to our homes and businesses. We see bustling small towns, well-maintained streets, roads, and highways. We see a safe place to live and raise families. We see wide open spaces and stars at night. I plugged that in there. We call it rural, and we want to keep it. That's my description of what rural is, and that's from a long history of living here and not living here and coming back here. Because when I was a kid, I lived here on the flats, and it wasn't my choice where I went. I was subject to parents that didn't know what they wanted to do, and lived with my grandmother here. But when I would leave and come back, and I came back a lot, I was somewhat disturbed. I lived in the city of Portland for a while, and I had some culture shock to deal with there. And when I come back, though, there's something when I was in the back seat of a car that came to my mind. I was sitting in the back seat looking at the stars, and I could smell this place, and I could hear this place because it was quiet, but that was me in rural America. That was me in Okanogan County. So when I think about the future and rural lifestyle, to me, all of that stuff, all my senses tell me what that is. And so if that's what rural lifestyle is to me, then I think that we have to pay real close attention to that business. And sometimes in my life, it was even, I could drive around with a beer in my hand and stand out on the run boards of my pickup and spit snooze out, and nobody would say anything to me, but that was another world. That's not that way now. And I don't know that we need to preserve that part of it, but that's kind of what, when I was logging and that stuff, that's what I felt like, like I get to do this. But after I write that vision statement, I'll use an example of a goal that might achieve that. And so I can say that this is a goal. The hard work of farmers and ranchers in the stewardship of their land is rewarded with economic returns that will sustain them and their families well into the future. That's a goal for me, as a county commissioner. It's like, if rural America, rural Okanogan County is that, then I want to keep it, and farmers and ranchers here are part of keeping that. And so how do I do that? And the reason I came up with that is because back when we were doing, did some work for the county when I worked for Highlands Associates. And it had to do with the NRCS now. Got a map from them, and they showed me agricultural lands, prime ag lands, these different distribution of lands. And I remember, I think it was Will Keller was down there that said, be careful with that map. And I didn't know quite what he meant, but I learned what he meant really quick, because I went to, we were staffing these committees that were dealing with ag lands and resource lands and those sorts of things. And the folks that were at that meeting, they were Farm Bureau folks, had a way different view of this situation than I did as far as gathering soil information, because they said the soil has less to do with it. It's the irrigation that actually makes agriculture in Okanogan County, the conditions are right for fruit and everything like that. But a guy from the Farm Bureau, State Farm Bureau, came in and said, if you want to protect ag lands, make them viable. And that's, if you tell a young planter that, you gotta go, they go, well, how do you do that? And that's challenging piece, is how do you do that? So when we say, what do we want, and if that's what we want, how do we get there is in that toolbox. And that toolbox has what we need to make ag lands viable. And we keep adding to that toolbox more and more as time goes on. Conservation easements were one of the tools that actually emerged that you could go, well, there's a way to make ag land viable. And there's many others. Some others are, don't over-regulate these people, I mean, it's like, regulation is the worst thing that you could possibly do. Incentive is the best thing you could probably do. And so that's why I appreciate service so much, because it's the support that makes ag lands viable. So there's another thing today. And so that's on the how do we get there thing. So if I have a policy that follows that goal, I'm working so when there's programs that come up, that's telling us how to act. It's saying, yeah, support that. Do what you can. Do you sponsor a grant? Is there anything you can do? Voluntary stewardship. Play the role there, be the one that goes out there and facilitates that, or get somebody to facilitate that can do that. So there's where it's saying, act like this. So that's a policy, and the county should have a number of policies that deal with it that way. So if we can get it, those are general, very general goals and objectives. When you get into the different categories of land use, you might add some, and there's comp plans all over the place that do that. And they're simple, straightforward. You didn't have to go through a lot of detail, because you're saying the policy is here. Generally, what you're going to find is that you can't address the issue because you don't have enough information, and you guys got some of that going on right now. And I call that planning to plan. You got goals and policies that say, that's inadequate, we can't do that right now because we need a comp plan in place that guides us to make decisions on a short-term basis. There's some things that can't come to mind right away, and we went, holy cow, if we don't do something about this now, it's gonna get out of control before we have an opportunity to address it. So the overlays for water in certain basins, we've made that overlay available. So it's like, wait a minute, if we have a subdivision that comes to us as county commissioners, you guys make a recommendation, we get there and we don't know if water availability, it says that in 5817, is there water available? And if we don't know that, how are we gonna make the decision? And so if there's a place, an area of question, we have to stop and go, wait a minute, there's a lot of lots there right now. Let's just stop right now and take a look at whether, if those lots are gonna develop, and if they develop out, is there gonna be enough water to serve them? And there's some places that most likely not.
I believe it's either a resolution or an ordinance on the lower Methow
Yes.
with the Columbia River.
Yeah.
I have never seen a map or any legal description that where the Columbia comes
Oh,
into
the influence of,
Yeah,
yeah.
where that water, where the boundary line is.
Yeah.
And that's something, and may I suggest, if you pass a ordinance,
Mhm.
and it pertains anything to land, any to comp plan, would you give they can give us a copy, so
Yes.
we blend together better and work together as a team.
And you know what? Honestly, that, out of a planning director, is an expectation of mine. So I was a little miffed that there's a few things that you hadn't seen. But it's my expectation that if we're doing anything outside of what you've recommended, then you should be immediately advised of it. So that was, now the map that showed up as far as the influence are concerned.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there is a map for that.
Is that the one you said?
Well, that's one out of the technical memo, but there's actually one attached to the ordinance.
To 15, that's 18.
But
Yeah.
Is it with it?
I'll get that for you.
Okay.
So-
If you don't already have it.
But, you know, and it's detailed, but yes, in fact, it's very important. And I think you were working on getting one for the Okanogan, did you end up getting one? Same thing?
They're still working on that.
Okay.
But I heard by the end of this month they'll have an
So,
influence
because the
line.
same issue is relevant in the Okanogan, with the exception that we didn't get into that detailed of planning until just recently when we're doing the Hearst fix thing, which I wonder if it's really a fix, but it keeps us busy. But regional transportation plan that we've seen in Okanogan County for a really long time. And it's got projects in it that actually could be implemented. But again, if you see things in that transportation circulation element that needs addressed further and we don't have the time to deal with that stuff now, it is plan to plan. Put it in there as an objective. You know, in other words, if we're gonna get a comprehensive plan that guides us through the next 5 years, even 2 years, and satisfies the need, make sure that we can put in there that, and reserve that concept to say, we need to do some further planning in the area. There's reference to sub-area planning in the Medhow Valley. What do you got, 2 sub-areas now? There's, I think, reference to in the comments that maybe there should be a 3rd as part of the more completely planned areas. Interesting label, but I think that, personally, I don't live in the Medhow. I go to the Medhow, I see it, I've been around the conversation many years, and I agree. I agree that there should be a sub-area plan for the Medhow. There's an interest in it, and that's what's important. There's people that are talking to you that they're interested in that happening.
And there's some testimony there about, that should be in the transportation plan. The sports trail, that should be worked in. It was a good comment.
Sure. Well, and I think, by and large, most comments in there are good comments. Some of them want things that we can't deliver right away, or we may not be able to deliver.
Yes.
But we have to be able to say, okay, that's an ideal situation, and we should work to achieve that. We might want to do that, and if we do, we should put it in there as a goal or an objective and say, what are the steps that we need to take to do that? But we can't do it in this planning effort right now. And that's what concerns me, is that, you know, you can adopt a comprehensive plan and say, that's this version, and at least we have something in place that deals with the issues that we're having to deal with today. The water issue is in one of those areas, because while we're doing this watershed planning work, and they've been doing it forever in Medhow Valley, right? There's a couple of questions that come up, and they're argued about a lot. And until those are resolved, there's a certain provision in the comp plan that you might not be able to address. So you say, this is the conversation today, this is what we're trying to get over, and the plan might even have some suggestions to resolve. Say that most judges, and so that's a kind of a warning that you don't want the judge deciding that for you if you can help it. And that's why I promote the conversation with the folks that have the seat on the table. We had that conversation, and that's why we were given time. And the Yakimas actually, you know, did bend over a little bit and say, okay, we'll back away from it and allow you some time. Although they've got to twist our arm because they think that maybe we won't do anything, and that's probably true. So we have to address the issues that they brought up. And if we look at them realistically, we might be able to address those issues as far as water is concerned. There's a lot of things about water that people don't consider. One of them is that we talk about quantity and stream flows, fish only need this much, on and on and on. And I say things like, and remember your wastewater treatment facilities, they discharge to the river. And if they don't have enough flow to take that flow out at the other end, then you just got yourself a sewer line out there in the river bottom. So there's other reasons to have water flowing down the river. But then we're challenged also with the fact that we're selling our water rights right out of the basin. And guess where they're showing up? They're showing up in the big basin, where the Columbia River project is, and there's that water being bought here, and it makes that water available in the Columbia River, and they're thriving with huge farms and things like that. So keep that in mind, you know, it's in that effort we have to do that. But there's some other things that the Yakimas have included, and that they'd even say things like, you know, enforce or something along those lines, but be active in federal water, Clean Water Act stuff. We should do that anyway. We're not gonna enforce the Corps of Engineers rules. But the fact is if we don't tell people what they are and what they mean, all they're gonna do is go out and get in trouble. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again in Okanogan County. And that will subject Okanogan County to a lawsuit more than anything else. When a landowner comes in, develops a piece of property, and misses a few of the finer points about developing in the shoreline, and they do the development, and then along comes the Corps of Engineers and the Department of Ecology and says, take it out, they lose a lot of money. And sure, that's their fault for not getting into the rules a little bit more. But I remember a day when we had brochures that said, so you're working near the water. Well, you might want to consider these issues. And then we developed, after that, we developed this JARPA, the Joint Aquatic Resource, whatever that permit application was. I was involved in creating that, and I was a little bit disturbed when they started pushing that aside. Because what it is an opportunity for that landowner to come in and recognize every permit necessary, even though we don't issue the permit. Because we could say, okay, we don't have anything to do with that, and we don't even believe in it. And then the folks develop their property, and again, I've seen it on Lake Vesuvius a bunch of times. In their big developments, they put a bunch of fill in the water, build something on it, and then all of a sudden they have to pull it back out. And that's because, you know, we as, you know, our planning department isn't given the directive to say, no, you pay attention to those and know them. You know, it's like they should know those laws. And so we want to make sure that that happens. And so sometimes the plan turns out where it's like, we don't have anything to do with that. Please don't do that. Again, I can give you a list of projects if you were interested, but I don't think you want to see all that, where they had to take that stuff out, Palmer Lake, Lake Vesuvius, and I just know those because, you know, I worked up there for so long, and I was always brought into those things because it was on Lake Vesuvius. So, but again, the vision, and if you stay with those fundamentals and don't get too wrapped around the axle about what that lawsuit says, I think we can get there. I honestly do. I think we can get there without a fight.
One thing I've noticed in the several years I've been involved with this, and talking to some other counties, FutureWise almost always sues every comp plan, regardless if it doesn't follow the, you know, what they want to the, you know, for the planning, and even that, what they're after.
It's absolutely true. And some of those we chose to have happen. And when I worked for Bridgeport, I was hired as a planner to watch the planner, which is an interesting thing. And in fact, we did some changes to the comp plan before it was adopted under the Growth Management Act. But because it was like, look, you know, you don't have to get too carried away with this. Just make sure that you know what you want and you do it according to the act and on, you know. But and that's my view of that. I mean, really, honestly, yes, you will be challenged, but one of the concerns I had with hiring an attorney, especially a particular attorney, to defend us, was that that attorney was used to the fight with those. He knows them by name. He knows them very well. And so there may be an advantage to that, but my concern about that is it's a continued battle that I don't want to really see happen. You know, so I don't think we have to do that. The attorney's a good attorney, knows his business, but on the other hand, attorneys can suck up a lot of resources to do those things.
And I think that's a well-taken statement, because the people who got us into all the lawsuits in the past, they may have been well-founded from either side, but do we really want them to guide the process into the future?
And, you know, I go to legal review, over the years, I mean, I was the president of the Planning Association of Washington. I frequently had legal updates. And in those legal updates, there's a guy that did them, and he was really good at it, because he made it interesting, and you can imagine how boring a land use case can be if you get into the details of it. Read this. And so, but he said, you know, judges don't really like, and the Supreme Court doesn't really like land use cases very well, because they're really complex, and they're not trained as land use attorneys necessarily. They get these cases that come up, and then they have to determine these cases based on all these past lawsuits. And it gets really messy, and the next thing you know, they come out with something and you go, really? You know, and zoning bulletin will tell you that, you should get that. I mean, the zoning bulletin, you guys should get a copy of it, because you can read it, and you can go, wow, we don't want to be those people that did that. And it's all based on a lot of arguments with case law. And so I don't want to go there necessarily. I mean, if we can help it, I think we can actually address these issues, these comments in a responsible way, and I really think we can keep from doing that. So it's just a suggestion, because in the end, we have to make it.
One of the things, Chris, and actually I put it in a motion in our last meeting, was to hire a legal counsel to write a draft comp plan. As we get all of these comments, some of these can be pushed aside because they don't even follow the RCW's for a comp plan.
Yeah.
If you go through them. And I think we would move along quite a bit faster and have a draft to review, and then go from there with legal counsel writing it for us.
Don't let a legal counsel write your comp plan.
And
No.
we
No.
amended that to reflect that,
I-
to leave the option to hire
Yeah.
a very competent,
Legal or
yes.
technical.
Right.
experts.
Technically experts can
Yeah.
do it. Thank you.
You know, I've weeded through, worked through the comments and sort of categorized the issues and concerns, and one of the very top was get help.
Yeah.
I took
Yeah.
that 64 times, and I felt really good at the last meeting in that we didn't make any bad decisions, and we made one good decision.
Yeah.
So that's my question, is we
Yeah.
specifically asked to get help. And
Yeah.
I'd like to know what the response from the commissioners.
Is
That,
that why they sent you?
No.
Are you-
no,
are you in line?
they don't know I'm here.
Oh, they don't know you're here, okay.
I don't think anyway, they probably know by now. They're probably concerned.
Yeah.
One thing I'm concerned about, of course, with just hiring someone is the budget. Now, if Commissioner Hover, who is the numbers budget guy, decides that he can actually grow some money on trees, because he says money doesn't grow on trees, and I agree with him 100%. Where the money comes from to do that is an important factor. And so we haven't had that conversation, is there enough money? But we do have some conversations about possibly hiring someone to write the plan, and it would have to be someone that was technically, able to do that without injecting any sort of subjectivity to it. And so it wouldn't be, probably it would be best if it wasn't somebody that was in this county, because of the read that people get on who it may be. Alls it would be is a technical writing that in fact captured what you want, and what we want, and that's possible to do that. I know a few planners in places that do that. It wouldn't have to be somebody I knew either, by the way. Yeah, several come to mind where I see a planning effort done, and I saw how they dealt with it. I saw how they dealt with delicate issues, and they laid out a plan that seemed to be pretty reasonable, given the fact that we had to pay them $50,000. But we had other money to do that. That's transportation plan's one of them. I could say that that planner that wrote that plan is very good at that kind of thing. That's Sarah Black is her name. But she was in Olympia. I went and met with her and inserted pushed on this primitive road study, those kinds of things to include in that plan. And she wrote that really well, and she presented it well in a way that it's got pictures and everything else, but it cost a lot of money, and we had money through Regional Transportation Planning Organization to do that. We can explore that, but what I would really suggest you do now is that you could use the skills that Angie has right here that have been relatively untapped to take and rewrite the plan according to a outline that says, because you're hearing people say there's no land use element. Well, that's pretty easy to make happen. And all these things that go under that land use element can be plugged in there and dealt with. I think she can do that. And I would suggest, just in the meantime, while we're having this conversation, you take that route. And when you go away, and she comes back, she may have a whole section prepared for you according to that.
So what we've got here for the different alternatives, one way or another, it says coupled with or along with
Mm-hmm.
a connection with the availability of potable water supplies.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all we need to say about water availability in writing this plan? Are we gonna is that gonna be a legally defensible way of dealing with the reality that we've got
Absolutely.
a lot more lots?
Well, I don't know
than we've
about
got?
defensively, but you tell me whether you think that serves your need is my question. And it doesn't serve my need to just put that in there. My need is to say, back to a funnel, it's on this level of information, my need is to say, we recognize the connection between land use and water. We recognized in certain basins that there is uncertainty in terms of the availability of that water. There are these studies that have been done to say something about that. And then my next thing would be along the lines of, we need to then have the implementing ordinances and regulations and efforts and policy statements that say, we will pursue answering that question because that's what's going on today. And you have to do that. So to me, I don't even think about whether that's legally defensible. I think that it makes just plain sense. And so when you get done making sense, then I got a feeling that you're gonna get into something that's legally defensible. And that's really, you can't ignore the fact that if you don't know the water isn't there or you're having an argument about it, then to me, you have to answer that question. If you can't answer that question in the time frame it takes to adopt the plan, then you need to identify that as a goal to achieve.
Well, from reading the 08
Mhm.
watershed plan, there's a lot of good information in
Yes,
there.
there is.
And none of it's been embraced so far in terms of, land uses and.
So,
And
and,
so we got Tunk now where there's a moratorium on subdivision, but,
right.
It's just a train wreck in motion.
So the question I have today is that if you're gonna address that issue, what do you have to have? And so for us, we have to have some information here, and we have to verify that there's a problem there. We verified it well enough to say, we put an overlay on it and said, we're not gonna make any more lots until we answer the question. Because when a subdivision comes up, and again, I go back to the law, subdivision law in the state of Washington, 5817, says you shall determine whether or not there's water quality and quantity to serve the subdivision. And I can't answer that question if somebody says, here's a bunch of evidence that says there's no water there to serve the subdivisions in the future. So I have to go, wait a minute, I have to answer that question. So what do I do? Do I say, no, and we can do this, at the project level? That means project level, meaning a subdivision application comes in, and we look at that. I expect to have a staff report from Angie that says that these are the issues that have been addressed. The comprehensive plan says this about that area. And you also have to decide whether there's adequate water there. And then she says, I can't ascertain that at this moment because here's these studies that say there isn't. People are arguing about these studies at this very moment. And I would have to say as a commissioner, I'm not gonna approve the subdivision. I would have to say that. So what the overlay did was said, don't put people in jeopardy and say, we'll take a subdivision application anytime, but we're likely to deny it. That's not serving anybody, I don't think, very well. And so those are the options there. And so the train wreck to avert, I think that's word, is to say, we gotta address that issue, but I'm not gonna approve a subdivision. I'm not gonna vote for the approval of a subdivision if I hear that and know that. And so, yes, and that's the deal with the Methow Valley. You've got a bunch of subbasins that are closed. And if we don't recognize that, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna go, those basins are closed, let's have a fight? Or are we gonna go, let's take some kind of a logical path to get the answers that we need to these questions? And one of them, if you send the staff report to us and there's a subdivision application and it says, it's a closed basin, and we go, it's a closed basin. Answer, no. And hopefully that will be what you all are doing as well. And hopefully you have enough information and I emphasize training to know that. But that's what we're addressing here, and the argument about domestic wells and whether you can serve a subdivision with a group domestic or a single family exemption is a little bit of an argument that's going on. And it's to the detriment of the development of the Methow Valley in a logical way, as far as I'm concerned, because we don't have the answers to people that are gonna develop, and the shifting sands are causing them to either yell at us or not invest in their developments, those kind of things. And we have to have some predictability, and that's what this planning effort's for. So, if anything's gonna be a train wreck, that's what we're trying to address right now. I don't have any other solutions for it except to have a lot of attorneys fighting people's battles for them.
The water study in Salmon where they put the wells in,
Mm-hmm.
do we have that documentation anywhere?
Yes, I've read it.
Okay, there are times when they can't find the documentation, it worries me, because then we can't prove it. That's an unlimited area there to Weeman Bridge for water, but then below Weeman Bridge, it's a different story.
Yeah.
But we need that documentation, because Barry said, well, where's it at? Where's this at? Where's that at? And then below Sun Mountain, we deny the development.
Yes.
And that has come up recently within the last 2 months. And I understand they were going to approve it. There's no water there. And it went from 20s down to 5s.
So that's the thing that happens is that you say there's no water there, and you have some background that tells you that you know there's some documentation that says that. There's people out there saying there's plenty of water there, and they don't have that documentation. So you're right, it's very important to come up with that.
But it'd be nice to be able to push a button and here's what you need. And it's difficult.
With the technology, but you guys pretty much knew where that stuff was, though, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's some part of this that there's a disconnect in terms of things not being available. And I heard the same thing about the work that was done in the communities in the past, there was a lot of feedback given by the neighborhoods, if you will. And it was like, well, that's lost. And my understanding is, no, that wasn't lost. And so I don't think any of that stuff was really lost.
I think what people said was lost is when they did that custom and cultures from the
Yes.
Catron County
Yes.
ordinance
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
When they say it's lost, it's not being followed and it's not being implemented, rather than it's not being, it's still there, but the county's not following that anymore. Is that's what people are saying, that we're losing that tool.
The custom culture and tradition,
Right.
right? Well, that's worth revisiting.
Well, also, from the last round of the comp plan, all the community hearings and studies, none of that was put into the last.
Right.
So, I was provided with discs for each of us with, all the documents that were retrieved from the county on the work of the neighborhood groups. And I walked out of the house without bringing them, and I apologize. I'll email, I'll send them to Courtney, and she can mail them out to everybody. So sorry about that, but I understand it's yet another 1,500 pages for all of us to absorb, and,
I was involved in that, I mean, where you're
Yeah.
talking.
yeah. But, I mean, a lot of people did a lot of work, and I've heard a lot, at the time I was involved, I did all this work, and that was completely thrown away.
Ag issue and stuff, and those committees have come.
Other than people that just invested in the place, as far as land ownership and things like that. But to me, there's a very important element here to comprehensive planning, and the people that live there have a lot to say in it. And I think that we should be considering it. They're the ones that live there. And so this, we might say, well, this is better for the economy and you if we do this. And it's like, well, wait a minute, they live there. And so if we're ignoring that, we have a real problem.
No, I agree.
And we're not gonna. It's just that we need also to work these things out so we have a comprehensive plan that has a bit of durability to it. And what I mean by that is that any set of commissioners that come in here have got to be, it has to be worded and it has to be practical enough that they will continue to follow those policies. Because the last thing that I would like to see is turning the county upside down every administration that comes along. That's a huge problem, because that's what the planning effort's about. It's something that's durable, and it says, yeah, in fact, this is this place, and we have to pay attention to these things, and most of us agree. I remember one county commissioner saying that I didn't want to be a county commissioner. It wasn't you, Dave. I don't want to be a county commissioner anymore because,
Coming over in the winter, taking pickup loads of deer,
mhm.
and I thought, when I was in Little Shaver and went to school in Twist, we ended up eating venison all winter from the roadkill. And so I just simply said, we ought to put together a group. We went ahead and picked up those deer, cleaned them up, cut them up, froze it, and we took pickup loads of deer over to the coast to the Indians. We haven't had a bit of trouble. They had us come over for a barbecue. It just shows you what you can do, what people will do to solve a problem for our wildlife.
I think the biggest thing too in that regard is that make sure that those that are bringing various issues up, that you know that you're listening to what they're saying. It's like, it's, and it's some things we can't address necessarily, but we can hear, it's gonna be harder. If they are engaged in it, it's difficult, but if they're not, it's gonna be more difficult. And when I first came into office, I had a guy say right to me that, he was yelling at me in the parade. And he was right ahead of me. I couldn't run over him because he had a tractor. But he said, you're gonna turn it all upside down, everything that we've done. And I said, I really don't think that that's gonna happen, turn it upside down, but we do need to address some issues here. And that's all I could say. Because really, it's not meant to turn anything upside down to the point where then it's worse than it is. It's meant to address some of the issues that have been raised, and the lawsuit came about because I don't think that those that filed the suit, excluding FutureWise, because FutureWise actually is working with MVCC, but I think that they weren't listened to on some various ideals that you're trying to satisfy that may not make a whole lot of difference in the end game. It's like, don't tell me what to do. Well, okay, we don't want to tell people what to do, but we do have to have something, an organized fashion of development. It's just got to happen. So that ideal can get in the way of good management because you just might be opposed to everything that has a management element to it, and as far as land use is concerned. And you can tell. I mean, occasionally I have somebody who says, you're a socialist. You do comp planning. You want to tell us what to do. But a lot of those same people are calling me on the telephone saying, there's this use that just got established next to me, and I don't like it. And you're going, well, there's only one way I can really deal with that, and if it was addressed in a comprehensive plan and zoning that said we need to deal with incompatible land uses, then I don't have anything to say. And minimum requirement district, just that district alone, it lays out a scenario for that. And we've seen it over and over. You saw it, I think, when you were in office, when a racetrack shows up next to somebody's place up in the Highlands. It's like, a racetrack? Really? That's great, but all of a sudden there's a lot of people coming from another area and they're setting up on the weekend, and we didn't really expect that to happen in our neighborhood. And so we've got to have some logical land management tool out there that says incompatible uses have to be dealt with in one way or another. And we can't wait until they happen, because then that's the lawsuits again. And so again, back to what's my vision for what I want, and then how do we achieve that vision? And it always comes down to some zoning issue that says we got to make sure we address incompatible uses. You saw it in it probably says it throughout the 1964 comp plan. I mean, really? 1964. And did the world turn upside down because they adopted that plan? I think they burned it in the streets of Tonasket or Oroville. I can't remember. But did it turn the world upside down? And did we take people's living away from them? I don't think so. I really don't. A lot of people didn't even know that it existed in the first place. But then
it took them a long time to even rewrite it, so it couldn't have been that bad.
No. But the minimum requirement district turns into a problem. And then the other thing is that efficiencies is, and people say, I'm a conservative, and I go, I'm a conservative. Because I don't know that I can spend the money to expand a road to a place that is remote, and the return on the investment is like,
Exactly.
I don't know if that's going to work. So I think I'm a conservative myself.
Yeah.
I'm a fiscal conservative in that respect. So
One thing that really concerns me, and I think that's what you're bringing up, is how to deal with things that concern us.
yes,
And I've had the good fortune to travel to a lot of countries. It's pretty dang remote, nasty places. But it stands out that very often, the local people are graduating from high school or anything else you can imagine to acquire a piece of property to start a life.
mhm,
And somehow I would want to protect that. Because like you, I'm a returning resident. Like Sally, I'm a returning resident. These are important to me.
yeah,
Providing that opportunity for the future.
Yeah.
Rather than the land being, let's use the term locked up, but that's traditionally used in terms of how public lands are addressed. But I'm speaking more of in terms of places to build a home.
well,
Places to develop your life.
there's a map right behind you, George. You know the place. And you see a bunch of houses there.
Yep.
And it's next to the railroad tracks in Oroville, an industrial area.
Yes.
A lot of the folks that moved there, I'm gonna guess, okay, that moved there because the land was really cheap, because it was next to the railroad, it was in the floodplain. And, but yet they could, pardon?
It was next to Valley Map and the warehouses, they were working right there.
And they were working there,
Yeah.
true.
Yep, they
I mean, there were big encampments there back during the mining era. And, but what I see there today is there was always, when I worked up there, issues that had to do with the compatibility of that, all those industrial uses right there. And in fact, there was one significant lawsuit that we had to work our way through because there was that, that lack of planning that caused a lot of uses to get established. And what we did to make that lawsuit actually go away for us anyway, the company ended up having to pay $500,000. But it was the fact that we had a comprehensive plan in place that had these areas designated. We had a heavy commercial, and that's not a residential, it was heavy commercial. And the lawsuit was brought by somebody that located in that heavy commercial. And so the comprehensive plan talked about the area, the zoning zoned it appropriately, and in the end, when it went to court and the judge looked at all those issues, they went, well, no, the town isn't. But in fact, the company itself, because they didn't want to have go to a jury trial, they settled out. That's unfortunate, but really the land use rules helped a lot. And if we don't have those in place, then people will file suits against the county and each other. And so I think it's just helpful to make sure that we have those planning issues in place, to deal with those. And it's not a perfect world either, so I'll just end it at that.
I think way back I was on the table, did you want to speak?
Oh, what I was gonna say was, when he was talking about the deer, in Alaska, they have the moose call line. So if a moose gets hit and you're on the call list, the fire department goes and picks up the moose, they cut it up, and then you get 50 pounds.
So I doubt that we're gonna put that in the comp plan, but it's a good point.
Probably not going to, but I got 50 pounds that way.
Well, by the way, I saw a moose yesterday and a cougar, the same day.
Oh, dear. Not close to
Could you
town.
do us a favor? Could you have that vision statement that you both, well, the one you had?
Yeah.
We've already got the one that.
Yeah.
Just as a reference.
I'll send it to you, I'll give it to Angie, and really, and the goal underneath it and the policy were meant to be an example. I think it actually is an adoptable goal and policy, but they're meant to be an example to say that this is how the order of things can work. And it always, I just really encourage you to always look back to the vision statement and the goals that you write, because then it says, does it meet that? Does it meet that? And then at least you got a reference to go back to.
Well, that's what I was wondering.
Yes,
is it as a-
absolutely, yeah.
As a reference goal?
Yeah, and you could use it, and then you could do anything you want with it.
Well, we've got to change at least one or two words because we don't want to plagiarize.
No risk here, this is in the public domain, you can, there's a term, it's an acronym, it's called CASE, C-A-S-E, copy and steal everything. It's in, it's okay.
Okay, that'll work.
Yeah,
But yeah, it'd be nice to have that as a
yeah,
reference.
okay. Yeah, no problem. So I just hope that, it helps, because I just hate to see you guys get wrapped around the axle on some of those details that are legalese details. Don't worry about that yet. Let's just get what we think we really need to do to be responsible. I think the rest could fall into place, because having the discussion with those that filed the suit may make it go away, because we're doing what we need to do. But the more attorney fees that get stacked up, then people get vested in attorney fees.
Well, that's the
So
reason
we
we
can
can't
lean
afford to
on-
get a good person to rewrite this, because we're paying too much out in attorney fees already.
We can lean on Angie to give us a draft and
I-
we can massage it and go from there.
I have faith in you guys as a planning commission. It's a diverse planning commission, and you're all seem to be very thoughtful about these things. So I don't see any radicals in the group. I see some very thoughtful folks that, Albert's probably the most radical up there.
So,
And I know him.
All three commissioners, are they confident that we can do this, John?
I don't know.
Just
I
one
will argue
commissioner,
in-
just you?
I will argue in your favor. I think there may be some confidence in,
Some,
yeah.
okay, just
I-
wondering if
I
they
just-
were feeling really nervous about us too.
I would feel strong
Okay.
about.
With that
what
being
you're doing.
said though, Chris, my question to you is, are you guys moving forward with writing this description or whatever you want?
What
for
you see
planning
is a
director?
result of conversation. So I still expect myself a process to take place where the comprehensive plan comes from the Planning Commission.
We write it, send it to them, they just sign it.
Okay.
So
Yeah, they just
what
signed it.
I'm thinking is, as far
Very
as,
invested.
as far as your question is whether the county commissioners have confidence in us. Well, I hope so, I hope we've got confidence in ourselves, but this is really daunting, and, I think maybe what we might wanna do is, yeah, I mean, start out working on the vision statement and make sure we're really solid with that, and maybe run that past the commissioners and say, can you, feed our efforts to them in chunks so that we don't go all in and then have it,
And-
have the wheels come off.
In the meantime, that deal where she organizes the comp plan, and that takes care of one of the major issues that you're getting comments on, could help.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Dave,
A timeframe, I see that we probably should, as we get into winter here, meet about every 2 weeks to get this accomplished with the commissioners. Okay, that winter would be a good time to really roll up our sleeves and work hard on it.
If we have word from you that you're working every 2 weeks together, I don't think you're gonna hear anything. I think you're gonna hear.
Is time of the essence, or I gather? it's
Time,
not.
time is of the essence.
It is, okay.
Yeah. But don't make it so much the essence that because Gina's right, it's daunting, but I think you have a lot of what you need in front of you. I think it needs to be organized in a way that people can understand what's there. And then there's those items that are missing, maybe that it has to do with fire safety in the interface, those kind of things. That can be added in there. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a regulatory thing, except that when subdivisions are approved, I think we should have some kind of standards that say, you got
But that would be
egress,
in the
you got egress in
subdivision
2 places. Because I just did a presentation to a joint state transportation commission group, the 3 transportation commissions on the West Coast, and the mayor of Paradise was there telling their story. And if you want to hear a story about egress, that scares the hell out of you. But that's a town, a whole town. But still, it applies to every development that we have as far as in that WUI, in the wildland urban interface. And so those things are being brought up, and I think it's very important that those things be there. There's part of it's there, though. I think we have what you need. It's just a matter of, if you have it organized and you have policies and goals and policies, I think you're 90% there. I really do.
Well, actually, in the plat process addresses a lot that we don't have to address in the comp plan.
That's right, and the thing is that, don't even look at it. Because you can go, we already have that in place, because you have to support it. And so if somebody tries to change it, your comp plan then says that, somebody says, we're gonna change the subdivision ordinance and take that out of it, you go look at the comp plan and say, well, it says that we're gonna do this. So you'll have to go through another process to change the comp plan and have the public come in and say, are you gonna do that?
Yeah.
That's what the process is for.
We have a critical area ordinance, and I've never heard or seen anything turned down. Where's the maps and where's all that at?
I'm turned down, you never see anything turned down, you mean as far as,
People do what they want in a critical area ordinance,
well, if
and there's been no enforcement.
If they do a application at the planning department, and I have conversations occasionally with Angie, about these things. The application comes in, and they do the site analysis, they see it, and the development has to conform to that. Now, if they're not doing that, then somebody's probably doing something without even
Getting a plan.
the interplay with the planning department anyway. So if those things are happening, Dave, call us up and we'll go look at that.
Or clearing and grading, sometimes it doesn't
Yeah,
get caught
clearing.
until it's too late, and then they have to rehabilitate, then you're fighting with them.
That's another thing about that, and my guys might think more and more about that.
So, Angie, were you referring specifically to clearing and grading in critical areas?
Clearing and grading anywhere, I'm just saying that, he's talking about critical areas, so sometimes it could impact that, and then we're in a fight with them to get them to restore it.
If you don't have a clearing and grading ordinance, then that might happen before anybody ever looks at it.
Well, because that was 31 comments in regards to we need a clearing and grading ordinance.
And those conversations have happened over the years. I'm sure that Phil and Albert remember us talking about that in the past too.
Is there specific language that requires the various county agencies to examine lists of the same issues that we would expect the public to do? I speak specifically of an example out of the Tunk Valley towards the north, where the county county public works wiped out a rear plan because they didn't choose to look. They didn't choose to examine the existing state list.
Was it designated as a critical area through the critical areas ordinance?
It
is the question.
was within a few feet of a pond.
Right. So the Public Works Department does have to look at those things, and if they
Yes.
ignore it,
Yeah.
it's not a done deal, and it's not over yet. But if they're ignoring those kind of things, there has to be some sort of action or conversation about it.
Yeah, well, it's well in the past.
And I don't know what their process is. Like, we send everything
Right.
to Washington State Archaeology, Native Plant, whatever the formal name of that agency is. And the Heritage, that's the word I was looking for. And they'll send a comment back saying, hey, within so many feet, they're
That's something that, in the comp plan, recognized, like,
It should be, that statement should be a
should,
thing we should look at and find.
somebody comes in,
Commissioners to come and give us some guidance, because this is the third time through for me to do this, so. And you're the first commissioner that's actually came in and gave us any guidance of what you guys are looking for.
well, and like I say, I want you to know that what I'm saying, I'm trying to make it rational. So I'm hoping the other two agree with what I'm saying here. I've watched planning efforts go on for a really long time, and I've watched the implementation of those plans. And it's not just in the city, because I was in urban growth areas or city expansion areas where this stuff's going on. And people are concerned that the county's subject to, there's a lot of risk going on.
So, actually, in regards to that, Phil, it was kind of striking reading through the 2014 plan and the attachment D findings of fact, where starting from number 25 through 34, the county commissioners went and made massive changes to the work that the planning commission had done.
Right.
There was, ahead of that, there was a lot of things that looked like they were really sensible things to include. And then, bammo, as we say. So that was kind of my point about trying to do this in stepwise, so that we know as we're going, if we're getting, if we're getting
Hot or getting cold?
sideways. Yeah, because that was said to me, it's like, we did all this work for this neighborhood plan, and God might do a lot of work, and it might get thrown away too.
Well, it did.
Exactly, and I'm not up for meeting twice a week, or twice a month, and months of work, if it's a product that is just not acceptable anyway. So, just saying, it just seems a lot more efficient if we try to have
There's
a
one
bit
thing
of
to look at.
communication and
It's a lot
feedback.
easier to tear somebody else's work down than just create your own.
Correct.
So if we create a whole bunch, get the document created, then the county commissioners, 90% of their work's done for them, and then they can tear it apart, and then they'll be happy, but somebody's gotta create something to get started.
Yeah, well, like I say, so the vision statement we have, we just found out tonight that was Andy's work. We just heard something of Chris's thoughts, similar vein, but a little more detail. I wasn't even really aware that, we could write our own vision statement.
You bet.
But in any event, it better be something that, if we did mess with it, it better be something that the commissioners find acceptable. Or we don't want to, build a whole structure on top of it.
That was what I was asking for last time, where you write down what your thoughts and ideas and vision is. So,
I only got the part that we had to read this, which I did, but okay.
That's part of it.
I missed that part.
By the way, I see, and there was, I remember a couple of places where we had planning agencies available to us for code cities. And there were suggestions because planning commissions were a pain, let's just get rid of them. We have a planning agency and we won't have to have one. Well, my argument is still that you are all the interface between the local government and the people. And you're out there, and so that's why it's good to have a diverse planning commission. And it's great to see some experience on here as well, so that, but you're the interface, and so I really appreciate the fact that you're out talking to people and talking to as many as you can, because you're the interface between the people and the county commissioners, the elected officials, and that's why you're there. And you read the Enabling Act, you read a lot of the information in the short course on local planning, and you'll see that you don't get paid for that very reason. You're out there representing the community, and I don't know, you guys get paid in satisfaction, I hope.
I work for muffins.
So, I am going to leave, and I appreciate the time, and I wish you luck, and I will come back if you want me to come back and talk about where we're at.
Well, with your expertise, I would really like, when we get about halfway through this nightmare, I would really like to have you give us review what we're doing and then give us your 2 bits.
Yeah.
I think that would really help us stay on course. Because it's really easy to get wrapped around the wheel of trying to put too much, wrong stuff into the plan, the regulatory stuff into the plan.
Right.
And that's, I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that we had a lot of trouble with the first time we went through, because we
Yeah.
were trying to do the zoning and the plan at the same time. And so it got morphed together a little bit too much.
Well, and there was a summit, a growth summit. How many years ago?
Oh,
Over at the Agriplex.
07, I think that was.
7, is it 07? Yeah, it could have been then, and I was attending that meeting, and Perry was in the front, and he was talking, and he said that they were gonna do the comp plan and the zoning code together, and I was in the back of the room, and all of a sudden, he says to me, clear back there, what do you think? What do you think about that? And I said, well, I suppose you could, and I should have never said that, but I said, I suppose you could do that, but I'm pretty much used to doing the comprehensive planning before I get into the implementation part of it. And I should have been a little stronger in that respect, because of the confusion it really has caused over the years. And it really has caused a lot of confusion, and
Well, and then we added the SMP and the CAO on top of that.
right, so, and it's not easy work, I tell you, I agree that it's daunting, but.
and thank you for coming down, and for appearance of fairness, we will invite
Okay,
Thanks, Chris.
only get them one at a
Thanks,
time.
Yes,
Take them one at a time.
no forum.
I would have to bring up a question that I had previously. In reading the RCW 3670, particularly section .30 and .40. .30 says, by ordinance of board, meaning the Board of Commissioners, may create a planning commission and provide for the appointment of, by the commission, of a director of planning. That implies that the planning commission provides for the appointment of a planning director.
Out of their membership?
Doesn't say that. It just says they, because that's one of the directives that they're given. In asking the Board of Commissioners about this clause, they said that it depends on which was created first, the planning commission or the planning department.
Do you know the answer?
I do. The planning commission in Okanogan County was appointed first in the 1930s.
Oh, my word.
So I then asked them, well, there might have been a lot of legal things that transpired since then. And I left that in their hands and we have no answer.
Are they pondering it or
I have no idea.
ignoring it?
Angie?
I have no clue, this is the first I've ever heard of it, so.
And whereas RCW 3670-040, which is immediately the next one, says that the alternative is that the planning department is created first and then the commission. And in that case, the county has clear authority to appoint and hire the planning director.
Huh, interesting.
So I think it's an unresolved question.
Well, if
As
that's
far as
the
I
case, if that's the case, we can ask Angie if she wants to continue on this job.
So should we make a motion?
How did you know where I was going with this?
They're crazy.
You think?
So you're gonna make a motion?
Well, I just
There's
wanted
just
to
one little
inform,
problem.
I just wanted to
We don't have
inform,
money. We have no
I
money.
just wanted to inform the group of what I had done, okay?
But if we wanna, if we decide we wanna hire a planning, somebody like Angie, I would really like to know where the wages would come from.
Yeah.
I mean,
we're
are we gonna pay her out of our
volunteers.
gas
I
money?
think it-
I think all of it says about the planning commission and their volunteers.
Yeah.
So there's no
Yes.
hiring.
I
So
think,
you're working for free now, Angie.
Okay,
Well,
We
it's
got-
not-
Security.
we have to get this done.
we could give you another title.
some of this, the need is, do we, as the commission, assume more authority than we have in the past? And then be more proactive in what we do. I think whether or not this is a binding statement in RCW, it brings up that point, is where do we see ourselves and how do we get there?
We can draw it on that vision statement. We can draw it over there on the vision
There you go,
statement.
there you go.
So,
Speaking of which,
Let's
today's
proceed.
23rd, in 2 weeks will be October 7th. Is anybody,
I can't come out for this, well, you guys can do without me. I have
Oh, that's a grizzly bear meeting, we don't wanna miss that.
yeah, that's the same, that's
Yeah.
the
Same.
Monday night.
You guys are going through this, I didn't think of that for money.
Yeah.
there'll be enough people in the prisons to eat.
Yeah, but
You'd be missing 3 people anyway on that night.
Sorry, I'm not gonna be here.
do we have to have them on Monday nights?
Nothing to
What's,
do.
no, in fact, what's about the reservation for this room?
I've got other
Monday
Monday
night.
Yeah, I would just,
Until
I have to schedule it anyway, so I can work that out.
Okay.
And then probably as long as it doesn't conflict with the RIA 49 planning unit meetings,
So our
which is
next
the first
meeting is the
Thursday.
28th, our scheduled meeting is the
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking if we wanted to have it on the Tuesday, the 15th of October, because that's a 3-day weekend, we don't want to have a meeting on the day off.
Correct.
That's a
Yeah,
Tuesday?
definitely.
What's that?
It's Columbus
Columbus
Day.
Day.
That just rains it.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it
Tuesdays are impossible.
Third Tuesday for me is not open.
Okay. Okay.
Thursday, I'm not available.
And on Thursday, you're not available.
I don't know what you're supposed to.
How about, go back to the week of Monday, the 7th, and see if there's any other day in that week.
Well, that would be this Tuesdays available?
I've got,
Tuesdays and never.
Tuesday, the 8th would be fine for me.
I've got meetings Tuesday and Wednesday that week.
Tuesday
So,
and
so
Wednesday.
Mondays are just bad for me until middle of December. That's
Other
just,
than,
And
other than
Thursdays are
that,
bad for you.
Wednesdays and Thursdays are full almost all the time.
How does Friday look?
Horrible.
Yeah. Fridays are,
I think
That's hard.
this
This is football,
might
you know,
line
high
up pretty well with
Oh,
that
right.
memo you wrote. Have you seen that?
Yep.
Did you send
Well,
that to me?
one
Oh,
meeting's
thank
the
you.
only
No,
week
no,
I'm
I didn't
really
send it to you, but I got
super
the
busy on
same
this
thing.
book
Okay.
camp
Mhm.
3
I
days,
think,
Monday through Wednesday.
shouldn't we get copies to everybody, because that might be a good, I mean, do you concur with?
Yeah, and that's
That-
kind of what I
Yeah,
tried
that's
to
what,
base
yeah,
off of.
this might be helpful also.
Sure,
So is
yeah.
that something you could copy and
Yeah, of course.
hand around?
One
Yeah.
meeting on
The
Monday.
30th.
30th? Does that work?
September 30th.
That works for me, not for you. No, not me.
Yeah.
but I mean,
Date is that?
Are we gonna have anything done between now and then? Oh, we could,
Your vision statement will be written.
Monday, that'll work.
Yeah, the most important piece.
Is there a draft, something on fire that you can get together by then?
Yes.
Usually on the fire.
But
The wildfire
you know,
goals and policies.
Cutting down on people building or placing things in areas which are likely to have a fire problem.
Not to be contrary, but there isn't a place in Okanogan County that isn't.
I understand, I think minimize the possibility.
And suddenly become a fuel category.
Yeah.
Is there some model language out there that meets somebody's, that we can?
I think on
look
the
at?
visions, on the comp plan,
Yeah.
I think we want to say that we want to, make fire and fire prevention a high priority, but we don't need to get into saying we want to have fire-wise, we want to have this.
Yeah, is there model language out there that we can begin to look at?
Yes, I think I can come up with something that you all could look at.
Does that work for you, Phil?
Yeah, if you know me at all, I'm very, very, very strong on having fire, because we've got a development, well, a 9-mile development.
Yeah,
They got a
it's a mess.
4-mile road that dead ends on the top of a ridge with only one way in and one way out.
It's a
And
terrible road.
if it gets compromised below, there's no way to get out of it. So,
I think we need to look at something and then build from there, because of exactly the things you're talking
yeah,
about.
and it's a one-way road.
Right.
So if anybody's trying to evacuate, you can't get fired. We've dealt with this. We've had fires up there.
Sure.
And we had 5 rigs coming down the hill and 5 fire trucks going up the hill. And 45 minutes later, we finally got that all sorted out and got to the fire.
Right. So it's looking at that would be nice.
Yes.
Is there anything else that could reasonably get done by next week?
Seriously, yeah.
You talked about maybe developing a vision statement based on,
yeah,
Yes, let's do that.
let's start with the vision statement and go through that. And then I would like to just follow through on this and take the steps and go through the comp plan on this, the RCW.
Okay.
Yeah.
And go through this, check them off as we go through them, and that would give us a guide to go through individually and address each issue.
yeah, and
Would that work for everybody?
I think so.
and I
Probably
can,
not, but we'll make it.
Go ahead.
I can start reorganizing, but not making any changes, just
Right.
reorganizing things.
Because Chris did say something about many of the things are there, but they need to be kind of gathered up under the plan. Is that something you see also?
Yes,
And then put that being labeled specifically?
yes.
I think that really looking forward to you helping us out.
Yep.
Thanks.
I'm
So
looking
we'll go
forward
the
to it too.
vision statement, then we'll come through and start going down number one, the land use elements,
Right.
and check them off as we go through them. And then we'll go, once that is completed, then we can go to two. At least we're following the statute of what is required in the comp plan.
Yeah, also,
So did we decide on a date when we're coming back?
We didn't do anything tonight, except listen. So the 30th would probably be a good night to, it'll all still be fresh,
yeah.
the 30th of September. That work for you, Dave?
Yep.
Yeah, that works for me. Next
I
Monday?
keep saying that Mondays don't work for me. I'll have to drop out of this other thing that I'm wanting to do if we schedule Mondays.
But there's gonna be, it's got,
It wouldn't be the end of the world, but
like,
Close?
Monday,
it's every Monday until the middle of December. So I'm like not doing this other thing tonight. So that's,
Well, let's go to Tuesday. The
Well,
first one.
somebody else is not Tuesday.
Oh, I'm in, council that night.
And I can't do Tuesdays either.
I have
City
meeting
council.
first of October on Tuesday. And Wednesday, I'd be free the
Wednesday the
2nd.
second? Yeah, I could do it.
If Wednesdays are okay, that would be great. And if I have to, I can drop my other activity.
Okay,
Too many hats.
how about the,
Gina.
how about the
Some of them are more
2nd?
fun than others.
Dave, would the 2nd work for you?
Yes.
October second? Okay.
Sure.
I have to check it.
I think that I just moved Wednesday's meeting to Thursday.
Yeah, see, every,
A week ago, so I could be at October
see, I
2nd.
have a meeting
As
on
long as
Tuesday
the
night,
room
and then I have a
is
meeting Wednesday
available.
night, but
Correct.
the 2nd
Yes, I will check on that in the morning.
Yeah, that's,
So that
And
would
that's
be
at
easy.
7.
But that's
On
2
second.
meetings in a row. I hate that. Okay, so we have sorted out that the 2nd of October, 7 PM, will that fit
can
with
we
this?
start earlier?
I'll check in the morning on that date, and if it does not work, I'll get back to ASAP.
Okay, do we have an alternative places we can be? The Club Tavern would be a good place.
There you go. I second.
Well, we do have
We might get a
portable,
lot accomplished.
portable recording equipment, but it's a little, it's not as nice as this to hear everything.
Patrons. They'll beat us up.
Okay,
So, there
so,
won't be much of us, because we've met over in the office before, in the back room.
Mhm,
That's big
in the
room
natural
over
resource
there.
room.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause we did that two
Yeah.
times ago, in the comp plan stuff.
Yes, we'll have that as an alternative. I
Okay.
don't think they have anything that night, but I'll double check in the morning.
And do we want to start an hour earlier? About
At
a half
6?
hour.
Sounds
It
good.
would be better
Does that
for
work
me.
for you?
Six.
Do you?
Well, I'm not sure if it works.
I'd go
Sometimes it
half
doesn't
hour
work for
earlier.
Dave.
Probably make it work with it.
It's hard to get over here. I mean,
Yeah, he has a long drive and,
for me to
You know,
quit work at, I have to quit work at like 4 to get here at 7.
mhm.
Yeah, unless you want me to come in smelling like I did this afternoon before. One of the reasons I got cleaned up is I got rained out hay.
It just,
Oh, you got
So we'll,
crazy
we
shit.
can start at 6 and
6:30.
you can join us.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'll try to be here by 6.
6:30?
on Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay, October 2nd at 6. Okay.
Was that 6 or 6:30? I heard both.
We'll do 6. I got overruled.
6.
6? Oh, okay. You're coming smelly, Phil.
Well, I'm still ahead, but you never know.
Okay,
It doesn't always work.
the next meeting.
okay.
So as far as information that we need, I understand the whole idea of a full-blown economic analysis is a big ask.
Mhm.
But as, it seems like, as far as the different alternatives are concerned, there will be differences in the costs of the road systems, and in public services, emergency services, and it would be nice to have some, even if it's just a qualitative set of information. I just feel like it's kind of silly to choose had any idea of what the economic impacts to the county government is going to be. I mean, without that information,
It's always best to try to get what the economic fallout is going to be, but right now it's pretty broad. Did you ever find the American Farm Act?
It's in there.
Yes.
I read it.
Okay, good.
that
Is
was
this-
a good piece, yeah, there's a lot of good work there.
We could argue it either way for a long time, but I did read it, yes.
Yeah. And I think if I actually dug through my boxes, I could find all the rest of the stuff on this, but this,
They have a link in this document that I didn't click on, because I just found it real fast.
okay.
But I can send that out to everybody.
I got
And
a
this was
copy
done in
somewhere.
2016.
Didn't we
Big-
get, we
big
got mailed
lengthy-
copies? Yeah, I think so.
It's in
On
here.
Yeah,
Saturday.
it's in this.
I didn't
Albert
print it.
still has a box to get though.
Oh, it's right here.
Oh, Albert didn't get his box? Ew.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, so it's in your box.
The box is still in the post office.
Well, at least you know where it's at safe then.
I got mine yesterday.
What was the name of it?
I had one question about I really like this map
Tell
you
you
gave me.
this.
You gave us
George, what's the
about the
name of it?
ownership map.
Oh, yes.
Okay, you do not have BLM in here.
No, I didn't get a big box.
I heard that Phil had a big box.
I picked it up this morning.
Oh, okay. I'll probably get it to you.
Is this one here?
Oh, you got it this morning, okay. Oh, wow, okay, great.
I didn't send that box to stuff. Yeah, it's in here.
So it's, everybody's kind of, is it pretty big?
Because there's a lot of land. This is my box. Look out to the ground.
There's your big box, that's what.
Let's see, here's my box. And there's a
Wow, they
huge
spent a
amount of
fortune
BLM.
mailing all this stuff.
It's all around the bend of
Okay.
the
Going
little
on a
sliver.
mail
You need
route, so.
Right.
all of this in here.
There's probably several thousand acres.
They consolidated a bunch of land around
That'd be just like that.
Yeah.
Ah, all
Put
right,
it in
yeah, I'll
the
look for it.
jurisdiction.
That was
I thought it was
really
getting
neat.
really different than all of it, but.
They traded a whole bunch of ground with the developer.
Yep.
And, it made a huge difference.
Should I catch up?
So, I've talked to Ted on that.
Yes, so I will check with Ted and I'll get a revised ownership map for you.
Okay.
Good.
Because there's, yeah, I mean, it's still very little white compared to everything else, but there's even gonna be less if, you get the yellow in there. Because around Lawrenceburg Lake and at Nighthawk and, you know, down to the golf course, in Porterville.
And that's just going to be.
From the,
Okay.
from the border down to the
So
golf
that's
course?
one area one, and but what is really neat, like in our area, we were, all the landowners, there was an awful lot of BLM land that was in between old mining claims and stuff,
Mhm.
and old mining claims, and they gave the landowners an opportunity to buy that land at a fairly reasonable price, and it made it to get all those little 5 acres and 3 acres and 20-acre pieces out of the middle of landowners' pieces, and we were able to buy about 100 acres BLM land during that time. So that cleaned up a lot of it, but there's still I think there's quite a little bit of BLM up front, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there's some scattered various places. It just, yeah, I thought that it was included on there, but I'll have to check with Ted, because he developed that map a while ago.
We'll throw rocks at it.
What other needs can we come up with now that it's 9 o'clock and I need to go home?
Well, I think that if we can each write out a vision statement, and I think that Chris was going to send Angie what he had, and
Yes, and
quicker we get
I'll
that,
distribute it.
And that could come out
Okay.
email.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
and as a template, and then
Our goal,
okay.
it doesn't have to be a vision statement, just what we wanna see happen is parameters.
And then, we'll meet here 6 o'clock on the 2nd, and our regular meeting.
Will that be at 6 or at 7 on the 28th?
7, not the 28th, because
Okay.
that's a regular scheduled meeting, and if we change the time, we'll have to repost it.
Okay.
I think that's something to consider in the future.
I think so, in the
Because
winter
we have a
months,
lot
especially
of
winter,
winter.
so, yeah.
You know, maybe we don't do it today, but I think in the future, that's a consideration that I think we ought to think about.
If people work till 5 and they have an hour drive, how do they get to the meeting?
They forsake dinner, they don't eat anything, they don't shower.
There you go, Phil.
It's just an observation.
courtesy.
I mean,
It's a courtesy.
you know, some people do it, work 8 to 5.
I understand.
Well, I haven't forever, but,
We have a boatload of work that we need to get done.
well, I understand that completely. I'm just, you gotta make it where it's doable.
And Gina works for muffins, so.
Probably 15 times in the last 30 years.
Because Angie, if she gets off work, she's gotta go home and feed the family and
Just
everything.
Nope.
take care.
They're on their own, I stay here.
Come on, help me out.
Oh, sorry. But I could order pizza.
Anyhow, moving on.
Can we get copies of that one thing that
Yes,
that
yep.
flowchart thing?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
I can actually get them to you in just a second.
Okay, because I think it's pretty useful
So,
thing to
any
help.
other further,
Do we want to schedule November and get that going now, while we're doing it?
let's wait till, let's see how the 2nd rolls through. And then
How much we get done in,
yes.
okay, so we have September 30th, October 2nd, and 28th, correct?
No, not,
Just
not,
the 30th,
not the
Pardon me?
30th.
just the
Not the
2nd,
30th?
Yeah,
Okay,
just the second.
then the 28th.
good.
And then we'll probably hit, an extra one in November because, well, the
It'll be
25th of November is the week of Thanksgiving. We might have that sort of a week.
Mhm.
Because some people take the whole week off or something.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to push
And
it forward in November.
Yes.
on paragraph 3 on that, RCW 3678, 330, maps, diagrams, charts, all that.
Mhm. Yes.
You've got a couple of weeks to work on that.
Isn't
Okay.
it
Okay.
nice?
Well, as we go through these, that would accomplish
Yeah.
the maps and stuff like that, that would be decided.
Well, we need to know what
I would
we
make a
do have in
motion
the bank.
Yeah.
to get out of
Yeah.
Dodge.
Well, and one thing that I wanted to say is that another important piece that you might be interested in is like an inventory of what exists, such as like an inventory of, there's so much in ag, and there's so much commercial, there's so much this, that
We
type
had
of.
that the last time we did this comp plan.
But you
It's probably changed since then.
But you,
Go ahead, I'm just trying to let you finish it. Go on.
Anyway, that was something that I thought that I could start trying to gather an inventory for you, probably not by the next meeting,
What's that?
but it might help kind of give you a glimpse of what's going on right now.
Okay,
So, I mean, in terms of what Chris was advising us tonight and talking about the vision and the goals flow from that, and from the goals flow the
And I
policies,
think,
the
Yes.
journey. I'm just not seeing that in here, I mean,
that's why we're doing
Well,
it.
yeah, right,
And-
so if you're reorganizing this, what it would be nice would be to just show the blanks where there should be something,
Yes,
but there's not, because we've got objectives, we've got different planning objectives, we've got
yes.
overall objectives. I don't know how that relates to the structure of what Chris was
Right, and that's part of what I'm gonna try to reorganize for you.
That would be great.
On the inventory list, if you make one of these current today, I suspect that the 2014 comp plan has that electronically. And can you make a percentage or amount of change between 14 and now? Can you give us that information?
I can try, I can see, because there's been so many iterations, he was showing me all the files that he has, right? So I can see what he has in relation to that first inventory and see if I can compare against what we do now.
Right, because that would, although it's a short amount of time, 5 years, but it would give some indication of what the trends are and how much development and change is happening. And does that correlate to the options of what sort of growth are we expecting and how are we planning, at what percentage or what plan are we planning for?
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
Move to adjourn.
I second it.
All those in favor?